Welcome to this episode of Mosaic Days, where we talk about all things education, including student achievement and outcomes, professional development and learning, and assessment and accountability. I am your co-host, Leonard Martinez.
And I'm Allison Smith.
And what do we have on our agenda for today?
Well, we today, as you can see, have a full range of colors going on. And no, this is not a primary school classroom, elementary school classroom where we're learning about the colors of the rainbow. We're actually talking today about the recently released California dashboard results.
And they've been out now for a couple of weeks. Do you think when the dashboard is released for the state and, of course, by school district and county offices and LEAs, do you think everyone's rushing to see what those results are?
I don't think everyone's rushing. I think the bigwigs, I know you were, but I think the bigwigs are, because ultimately it's the district. I would say the district people probably are rushing to it first over individual school sites just to see whether or not there's been gains. The whole point of the dashboard is to look at where your students were last year and whether or not there were gains and improvements in certain areas. So I do think that there are, you included, people that go and rush to it as soon as it is released. But I think for other people, and we'll get into this, I think the dashboard is a really hard tool to read. So that's one of those things where, I'm not sure everybody is going and running to it if they're not quite sure how to actually read through it and process all the information provided.
Yeah, and I think it's supposed to be simple, right? We have we have the cards with the colors, and you can see how the state is doing, drill down to your LEA and by school site, how it's performing. I'm still a little, again, as doing research for the show, it starts leading you to all these areas and you're trying to find out as much information as possible. It's not as simple as one might think. And again, the colors are very, simple, right? They're colors, but the methodology that goes behind that, what it's attempting to assess is far more complicated than you would think.
Yeah. And, the whole purpose of us switching over to this dashboard back in, I believe it was 2015, was really to have some sort of measurement for the state to not just focus on test scores, but also to look at other components of learning, including absenteeism and, college and career readiness. But what I can say is that it's also supposed to be reader friendly for parents.
Yeah.
And it is a lot to go through. So I even know that as I've gone through it and kind of looked through the different diagrams that you can look in and all the information and all the charts and all of that, I've been like, oh my gosh, where do I go from here? And oh, wait, what is this over here? I mean, it is not an easy thing to navigate.
Yeah, I'm giving it a red for its usability and interactability.
I should blow the whistle. Yeah, like it's red card, soccer moment.
I'm giving it a red card and putting it's in the penalty. It seems superficially. So let me ask you this question, we're parents. As a parent, have you ever gone to the dashboard to see how your kids' schools are performing?
Never,
right?
Never.
So it's built as to use by parents and decision makers and educators. But as a parent, I've never looked at the dashboard, and I would say even ultimately as an administrator, I probably started looking at the dashboard. But even as a teacher, did you ever look at the dashboard?
No. Well, it didn't exist when I was a teacher, right?
Oh,
when I was a teacher, it didn't exist.
But we always had school accountability report cards. So they're all measured. There were all measures. There's always been measures to determine how successful a school has been. Have you ever, as a teacher, looked back at to see how your students were doing? Have you ever had an administrator look at and say, hey, we're going to review our accountability report card or the dashboard so we can see what gains we've made or what areas we need to focus on?
To be totally honest, I've had administrators go back and look at that accountability and the report card and, explain it to the entire staff as part of our late start or our professional development. But I was always, as a teacher, under the impression like that's their concern and how the entire school performs. For me, it was about, okay, how did my classroom perform? And so when they provided information where it was like, at the time, Miss Geller's classroom, you did such and such, that's what I was concerned with. But as the school as a whole or the district as a whole, I wasn't invested as a teacher in that kind of information. What about you?
I'm gonna say I'm not a again even now as an administrator, I'm not the biggest fan of standardized or formal or norm referenced assessment. We're always taught, at least in special education, that we need to collect data from a variety of sources to inform us about student performance, and so this is one metric. And so I would say that if this was a measurement of how students were doing, with the school report, with the student report, drilled down to the individual student, I would say if I had a measure of how the student was performing, do I have data from the class to support that? And so if I had data to support, well, here's an assignment my kid did independently, and here's what this assessment report is telling me the kid has performed. If there is some correlation, then I would say it's an accurate report. But and then again, this is the problem with part of this, right? This is one assessment done probably over 2, 3, 4, 5 days, however long it takes for the kid to get through the assessment. We're talking about 10 months worth of learning, 11 months worth of learning that is trying to be measured in 1, 2, 3, or 5, 4 or 5 sittings. How reliable is that versus an ongoing portfolio of student sample work that I can see growth? I can see real-time data to determine if a kid is making progress or achieving. Which one's more authentic? And of course, the answer, it's not an argument. It's not debatable. The answer would be this is a much more authentic piece of data that we can utilize to determine student achievement. This is nice and all, but if it doesn't correlate or it doesn't correspond to what's happening in the classroom, then it's not really a good measurement. I think the conversation we were having the other day was this test is administered in March or April, whatever the window is. Well, what happens to May learning and some of June learning?
It's out the door. We're on vacation at that point in time.
Yeah. So I mean, if we're measuring this at this particular point in time and we haven't gone through all the coursework that it's supposed to measure, then how do we know the kid is demonstrating what the kid had learned by the end of June or by the middle of June, we're in the school year in? So just, I understand the need for it. I don't know if it's doing what it's supposed to do, and I don't know if it is valid to respect of what the student is doing in real time.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, it can't be, I think is the answer.
Exactly. And I mean, so that is one criticism of it is that.
Oh, I have many more criticisms.
You've got more red cards to throw up. So that is one criticism, and it just kind of, and I think we could do an entire episode just on how we are measuring achievement across the entire United States, and just looking at, because, we have talked before about how some states have Common Core. Other states have, so, definitely another episode that we can do.
But it's, again, it's part of the rabbit hole,
It is.
You have to at least briefly talk about Common Core because, again, it's adopted by most states in the country for language arts and math, right? Yeah. And I was part of preparing for the show. I was reading that some states have repealed the adoption of Common Core because they didn't like it. So we still have it. The majority of the states do have it, but the Common Core standards is what these assessments are supposed to be based upon.
Yeah.
And then we talked about the other thing. There's a lot of publishers out there that are publishing state assessments. We use Smarter Balance, and that's being utilized by about 8 or 9 states. But the rest of the country is using a different publishing company to assess their students. So you can't say California, you can't rank we always talk about what states are performing better in education. You can't go merely on a standardized assessment, a state assessment that happens annually, because there's no way to compare the two. We don't have similar assessment tools throughout the state. So until we can do that, it's really probably unfair to say where any state ranks and why number 1 is number 1 and why number 50 is number 50 plus some of the U.S. territories. So it's really an unfair comparison to do. And until we come into some alignment, which at this rate, now with the federal government trying to give power back to the local states, we're probably going to be moving even further away from alignment.
Yeah. So when we look at California, we've got the color system, right? So the whole idea is that you have this color system, which we have here, right? The red, orange, yellow, green, blue. So red being, most.
Very low.
Very, very low.
It's low. It's very low, basic. high and very high. I
That's
think is
correct.
what it does,
And
right?
so every student or every school and every district is striving to have the blue in certain areas, or at least green, right? Green and blue.
But that's where I start going into that conversation
Yes.
about, can you have everyone in the blue?
Yeah.
And if you take a look at the norm distribution curve, you cannot.
Yeah.
If that curve is still valid, and a lot of people have thrown the curve out the window, right? Yeah. Can we have every school in the blue? And it seems very unlikely, very low probability that you can have every school in the blue and every student in the blue. And, you and I have had the conversations recently about all means all. All does not mean, people say all means all, but all really doesn't mean all. Mm-hmm. We're not going to have all students performing at a blue level. And so I think we start talking about mastery, which is a term that I really despise. Mm-hmm. We start talking about all means all with the asterisk, because there's an implied asterisk there that is all for a separate show. But we have these measurement systems that are supposed to be all-inclusive and supposed to report student achievement, and they're flawed in a lot of ways. We should start talking about test prep, testing the items. Preparing the test items. So they form a committee. I didn't realize Smarter Balance, which we use for language arts and math, is located in California, which I didn't know. Mm-hmm. And so there's someone there. They probably hire people to write test items, and then they test them. But I think the challenge people have, or the concern I have, is that when you take a look at state standards for a subject area like language arts, and we put a bunch of professionals together in the room and we start unpacking those standards, there's a variety of interpretations that are going to exist in that room. Mm-hmm. And so what type of agreement do they come with and say, hey, this is the standard, this is it unpacked, this is what we need to test, and now we need to create a test item that matches that standard. Mm-hmm. That is not an easy task to do. And you're talking about putting a committee of professionals together to do that. I think, and it's probably inherently flawed. Yeah. I don't know what type of calibration occurs where we all come into an agreement that this test item is going to test what we want it to test per the standard. I've been in data teams, I've been part of PLCs, and that discussion with just 2 or 3 teachers is a difficult conversation. Mm-hmm. So now if you're putting 10 or 15 committee members in a room to try to create test items, I don't see that being very productive. I don't see it being very consistent. I'll give you an example. I was on a data team years ago. We were talking about a one-step algebraic equation. And right away, some of my colleagues were coming up with 2-step equations. And I had to say, wait, time out. I said, hey, whoa. Let's hold on the red card here, because we're testing the standards of one-step algebraic equation. Mm-hmm. Why are we creating a 2-step equation for the kids to solve? That's not aligned to the standard that we're looking at. And there was pushback, and it got very heated. And ultimately, I had to back off a little bit and say, okay, this is what because I was in the minority. But that's kind of the difficulty with this is it's still open to human interpretation. Yeah. And I think that's where it's flawed, I think.
Yeah, well, it's subjective. I mean, ultimately, the entire purpose of this dashboard was to have these colors so that visually we'd be able to see gains and we'd be able to see, where maybe we went in the wrong direction. At the same time, what you're talking about, testing is still a component of that. Right? And we're still asking kids to measure their achievement based off of testing. So as a whole, when you even look at the state, and it does break it down by individual student populations, you're mm-hmm. also looking at other student populations potentially in the green or blue, and it's taking away from those student populations or the specified subgroups that maybe are still in the red and the orange.
Yeah.
And so how do we start to, as schools and districts, really look into a system that is not supposed to be so focused on testing, that is still focused on testing, yeah. right? And teaching to the test is essentially what we're still doing and what you were talking about. And I go back to your favorite thing, universal design for learning. How are our students able to display their knowledge in a way that shows that achievement level that we're talking about that isn't based on a test? Because I know that there are a lot, and we talked about this a couple of episodes ago, there are a lot of kids where that's a whole other skill set that kids need to have in order to tackle and master testing, right? That maybe some of our students are unable to do. So it's definitely a flawed system. Let's talk about California.
Do we have to?
Yeah, because there's an interesting that came up, that I just kind of want to review. But what are the results that we had for California in general?
So this is where, again, it's supposed to be user friendly, and I'm not sure it is user friendly because you're right. We take a look at it. The color is determined by two measurements, right? One is what was the achievement for that year. Also determines if there was growth. Was there an increase or a decrease in growth compared to last year? And so we talk about that 5x5 thing, which I still don't get, and I could never explain it to anyone. And I've seen it 10,000 times. But again, it takes two measurements simultaneously to produce the color. So let's take a look at what the state of California, how the state of California performed when this assessment was given this past spring. Language arts, we were in the yellow, so visually here,
yellow,
which is
middle.
Oh, I got it wrong. Right, I got to put it in order. Yellow's right middle of the road, right?
Middle of the road. Yep.
Yet we were 8.1 points below standard, which is really this thing that starts driving me nuts, right?
because we're like right in the middle.
If we're right in the middle, you figure we'd be average.
We'd be right.
But
maybe
we're not
at standard.
But
right?
we're not. Yeah, we're not average. We're below standard. 8.1 points below standard. However, we increased 5.1 points from last year. So there was some growth that occurred, a modest growth. And you start wondering, like, standard error of measurement, like, is this within that? Could it really be zero and we didn't make any gains? So, it's a little confusing at best. But we are below standard in language arts.
Still below. So I still feel like we should be yellow or orange then, because if we're below, right, wouldn't that be the appropriate over there? Would be the appropriate representation, right? For the state of California, if we're still below standard, there's still areas of improvement there that we're looking at.
So when we take a look at math, we are in the yellow.
In the yellow again.
Yellow again. But we're 42.4 points below standard, which looks like probably should be orange or red.
Yeah, so that's worse off than English language arts.
Yes, there is a math issue throughout the country right now with performance. Yep. However, we did gain 5.2 points. So again, it's based on your achievement, also based on whether you had growth from last year or not.
Yeah.
So this is why we had yellow, because it probably really should be orange. But since there was gains from last year, we moved to the yellow area. Can
we blend colors? Can we make a new color? What's orange and yellow make? Maybe we should be in the middle there. Tangerine.
Tangerine. So, but I mean, 42.4 points below standards is different. It is obviously a big deficit. We start looking at, again, the big thing the big event that's occurred over the past 5 years that have skewed results has been COVID, right?
Yes.
So we're starting to return we're almost at pre-COVID levels. So the decline that we had in test scores, and the dashboard wasn't even around for a couple of those years. Mm-hmm. The decline we see in test scores has almost, now we're back up on the upswing. We're almost at pre-COVID levels, which kind of begs the question, if basic, who determines what basic is, right? Yeah. How is that defined? And again, that's when we start talking about what are we going to focus in the show, I started doing some deep dives into the Smarter Balanced tests. But, what is basic? How is that defined? Shouldn't basic change from year to year? I mean, if we take a look at average, over how many years are we taking a look at what that average looks like? Because I would say that if COVID was a big event, wasn't that the new norm? And did they recalibrate? Yeah. Or is basic now just this static benchmark that existed the previous year, 4 or 5 years ago, 10 years ago, 15 years ago? I don't know how that is defined. I don't know how many test items you need, but it seems like basic should change at least generational. Yeah. And so I'm wondering how, if any thought, what are the variables that come into play when you try to come up with a metric to measure basic achievement?
Well, the other thing to think about, though, is for instance, the Smarter Balance is given to our 3rd through 8th graders and our 11th graders, right? So the 11th graders, when you look at the scores that the 11th graders have had, we're not looking at those same group of 11th graders and how they're performing now as seniors, that exact same group. We're looking at those 11th graders and then comparing them to the 10th graders that are coming up to be 11th graders. So when you're looking at that change, and that goes back to COVID, what are the contributions that occurred during that year, that added to maybe lower test scores? These kids might have done COVID on the computer, whereas these kids were actually in, you don't know what the factors are that contribute to that, right? You also don't know if there's maybe a bubble. We've talked about bubbles of mental health concerns that have come up, bubbles of, a higher increase in English language learners. You don't know what's contributing to that, but you're comparing basically apples to oranges.
Yeah. So it sounds like what you're saying is, should the measurement be individual student based to see growth?
Yeah.
Right.
Yep.
I mean, if we did some longitudinal data collection on individual students as they moved up to the grades, how are they performing? But you're right. We'll take a look at the high school one because it's probably the easiest one to talk about. If we test current 11th graders next year, we don't touch those kids. We don't test those kids ever again. They're done.
Yeah.
And then we take a look at the next 11th graders, which are the current 10th graders. And so you're right. You're not comparing a student's growth. You're really testing an age.
Yep.
Right.
And when you're talking about what you've already spoken about, when we're doing this in March, that's a one-time shop. Like we're hitting it one time out of the school year. So what about if that was a bad week for a group of kids?
Yeah.
What about, I just think about, the factors of we had the Altadena fire. So those kids missed instruction January, February, right? So what about those kids that then had to go into testing in March, right?
Yeah.
So you hit it one time. Is that really a true snapshot of how those kids performed in that one moment of time?
Yeah, I don't know. I don't think it's a very good system as it stands right now. And so we need to take a look at, the other thing, what about the kids, some districts only have 2 years of math that are required.
Yeah.
So what happens if a kid takes math in the 9th and the 10th grade, but they're taking the S back in the 11th grade and they haven't looked at math for a year?
Yes.
You can't possibly expect that kid to score well on that, I think.
They're all red cards.
Yeah. So are we? Exactly. I don't think I have a blue card for the dashboard
red cards,
or a green card. But so maybe not. Why arbitrarily did we choose 11th grade?
Yeah.
Why not choose 10th grade, where at least all students are taking a math course, align it to the standards, and create the test items based on 10th grade standards. So I'm not sure what the logic goes into this, or the planning, or just like this does not make any sense. That why would we assess this for? Science is the other question, right? Because I think they need to. Even though technically it's for informational purposes, I'm not sure if it's going to be an official metric on the dashboard for next year or the following year. But the CAST is only supposed to be administered once during high school, and they don't tell you when to assess it. We just know it has to be given to them prior to them leaving high school. So some districts have the conversation: should we give it their junior year? Should we give it to them their senior year? If you give it to them as a 12th grader and there's only 2 years of science requirement, they could have been 2 years out of science class and then take that assessment. You're not going to get any useful data from that assessment.
Yeah. No, it's definitely, let's talk about chronic absenteeism though, because that's one. This is another factor other than achievement, right? Because we had our English language arts and our mathematics, but this is one that you brought to my attention only because it is 17%, right? So it has us as yellow for California, but it decreased 1.5%.
So we're
so that was one where you and I were like, is that good or is that bad? Right?
Because I think it's good, because if your chronic absentee rate is 17.1 and it goes down, that means you have less kids chronically absent. I think that's a good thing, isn't it?
Or is. No,
Are you
it
sure?
is. No, I think you guaranteed that. Yes, it's a good thing because we want.
I guaranteed that. No, I'm not guaranteeing that. Look at the tag.
It was chronically absent was reduced for the state, which means it went down. But it's crazy because in the other areas, the achievement areas, it's all about gaining
growth.
It's all about going up plus. So on this one, it's minus. So then you're like, okay, is that good or is that bad? It just, again, it's about interpretation. How are people interpreting? Is that a way to measure it? If positive in some areas, negative in other areas, just like suspension rate went down. So you want suspension rate to go down.
Yes.
But then you have something like graduation rate that went up.
Yes.
So It's how you interpret it and how it reads. I just don't think there's consistency across the board.
And then the chronic absenteeism isn't measured at the high school level either. So
that's true.
Not quite sure why I think they give up at the high school level. I guess the notion is if we can prevent kids from being chronically absent in their early grades, then they will continue to show up to school at the later grades. Perhaps would be the logic.
But don't we work harder, I feel, at the high school level, just because, that's when students are dropping out. That's when you have to grab them and re-engage them in school.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it is kind of a little weird that we're not measuring that at the high school level.
71%. I mean, I don't even know. So chronic absentee is 10% of the days, the available days of attendance, right?
Yes.
So typically is 180, at the end of the year, 180 days, if you're at 18 absences, you're considered chronically absent.
Yeah.
So is this indicating that 17.1% of students in the state were chronically absent? That's almost a fifth. That was almost 1 out of every 5 kids was a chronic absentee.
Yeah. But then again, it has it at yellow. So you think
that should be red. That should be red.
Red
that should be
or
red.
Yellow or an orange.
That should be definitely.
I think because that's still a problem.
Yeah.
And then I think then breaking it down and looking at subgroups. Are there certain student subgroups that maybe are more chronically absent than others?
So you can drill down.
You could drill down into that. But then when we look at this yellow, and I feel like it's middle of the road here. Are the states just like, oh, okay, well, that's average. That's no big deal. That's really no big deal when there really is a problem for certain maybe student subgroups or socioeconomic areas.
Maybe not though, because I mean, again, these metrics are the logic is that they're related, right?
Yeah.
The logic is that if you're chronically absent, you're going to perform worse on the language, arts, and math because you're not in school to receive the instruction. However, when you take a look at the graduation rate, which is the next metric, it's at 87.8%. We graduated. We did increase that 1%. There's no correlation with chronic absenteeism and graduation rate. I think you could say. I think you can state, because if you're almost at 20% absenteeism, then your graduation rate really should be 80%. If there's a correlation to I'm out of school, I'm not learning, and I'm not going to graduate.
But again, graduation rate is the older students. Chronic absenteeism is the younger students. Yeah. So can you still really even link those to begin with? Because we're looking at a very, difference in age level.
Well, and we're not talking about really the same students. So you bring up a good point. So again, where's the longitudinal data that we track of students?
Yeah.
And I think that becomes a more important metric, because of these 17.1% kids that are chronically absent from K to 8, what is their graduation rate going to look like?
Yeah.
Right. So if these 17.1% kids, is that going to translate into a school's not important to me? I don't value school. I'm going to be a dropout and therefore negatively impact the graduation rate.
Yeah.
TBD.
I don't know, man. You've just created like 10 episodes for us.
I told you. It
is a rabbit hole.
I had notes upon notes upon notes for this episode. And then when we talked about, well, we can't go for 4 hours because no one's going to pay attention. But it does beg a deeper conversation in a bunch of these different areas, like the SBAC and like Common Core State Standards, and taking a look at some of these individually, like how are you going to address if your school's underperforming in language arts and math? How are you going to specifically address that? Do you need to address that?
Yeah.
Do you find that when you take a look at the dashboard that it doesn't correlate to the achievement you're seeing on a daily basis? So I think these are important conversations. I think we can say, hey, we did well on the dashboard. I mean, for what it's worth, we do publicize when we have gains, right? And we take credit for it.
Yes, but again,
if there's gains,
is that enough gain? Right.
If we don't make any gains, and I blame the previous year teacher.
But the thing is like really looking at, that's great that we had gains, but are people really going back and looking at the areas of need and addressing those with individual student groups, racial ethnic groups? Are they going back and really drilling down that data, or is it more of a superficial, oh, well, guess what? We went from yellow to green this year. Oh, we don't need to worry about it anymore. The hope is that data should be utilized by districts to really, focus in on that improvement area Number one, the data is not user-friendly. Okay, so I don't think it's happening enough. But number two, the entire purpose of this is to improve student outcomes.
Right.
And so if we are not utilizing this appropriately or effectively, and it's not user-friendly, are we really able to do that as districts and schools?
Well, we were at that training recently where we had the data person, and I'm like, yeah, I hate data.
Yeah.
So, and I understand the importance of data because I look at the dashboard and it does inform me of the work that we're doing, or we're not, or the areas that we need to focus on. However, I will say this, and again, specifically with children with special needs that have IEPs, that have services, and historically their achievement is less than what we're seeing on the state dashboard. So if we did the subgroups and we looked at students with disabilities, we can say probably in general that they're performing worse, they're performing less than, they're achieving less than what the state is saying or what a school district is doing. So I look at that data, and I know we need to increase the rigor of instruction that is going on in some special day classrooms. We need to bring teachers together to work with that. So I don't need data to tell me that, right? I don't need data to show me that I need to increase the rigor of students with special needs in their classrooms, and I need to train my teachers to do that. So I don't need any dashboard to tell me that I know that's what we need to do, because historically we know that students with disabilities have underachieved. And so our responsibility is, whether we have the data or whether we have any of this stuff in front of us or not, but our responsibility is to bring teachers together, to bring paraeducators together, and to train them on how we're going to work with our students with special needs so that they can achieve more. And hopefully, as we do that work, that's reflected in the dashboard next year, and the year after that, and the year after that. And that, to me, is the challenge. And I don't need any dashboard that confuses me on how they come up with these standards, and what is the standard score, what is the basic category. And I already know that most kids aren't going to be at that basic level. And so what am I doing to try to move them closer to that? And I might not be able to move kids to that basic level, and I have to be okay with that, which is a separate conversation about mastery, which I would love to have at some point in time, because I have my opinions on the term mastery.
Yeah. Well, and then added to everything that you just said, which is, bravo. We're also looking at how do we fund all of this additional support for all of these kids. So we've got, but it's an overall, can we really measure this when we don't have maybe the fiscal means to be able to address this? There's lots of different things that, like you said, it's a rabbit hole. We could have 10 episodes on this that you've created. So I definitely think it is a challenge. I think there's more, and it would be interesting to talk about that Common Core piece in a future episode, and how the United States, even the assessments, the standards are different across the board for a lot of different states. So,
and even when you're looking at the same standards, again, the interpretation of them, as professionals, how we interpret them and how we unpack them, and how we look at creating formative assessments, summative assessments based on this, we're always in conflict about what that looks like. And so if we have difficulty calibrating, even within a school, what can that be like at an LEA? What can that look like at the county level, at the state level, at the nation level? I feel like it's a task that is probably not possible, at least nationwide. I would say I'd like to see it at a school site to be successful, right?
Well, and it's not like I could encourage you to go work at the Department of Education for the United States, because you probably wouldn't have a job in a few weeks, huh?
I probably would. Be a one-man show.
One-man show. You're going to run the whole Department of Education and determine how best to focus on student outcomes.
Let's go through a couple of the other ones we forgot. So the college and career indicator, which is, boy, that is one complicated metric, and there are a number of ways to meet that college and career. We did hit green. We are saying that 51.7% of our students are prepared for college and career. That is an increase in 3.1%. The metric for calculating that is just ridiculous. Have you seen?
It's like reporting.
Have you seen the one page? Have you seen the 2 1-pagers?
Yes.
There's like a 1-page summary of college and career, and then college, and then there's a 1-page summary of career.
And then how the data is entered by LEAs, right?
Yeah,
to determine college and career.
It is, there's IB, there's CTE, there's scores on the SBAC. There's work experience. There's so many. This is to me probably is the most confusing metric. I think they're all relatively confusing, but this is probably one of the more confusing ones. But we does say we're at 51.7%. The other one's the suspension rate. I think you mentioned we're at green with the suspension rate. 2.9% of students have been suspended for at least one day, and that is a decrease of 4.4%. And we say a decrease in suspension rate is a good thing, I think, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
So decrease going down in this area is good.
Sure.
But also that speaks to the amount of work that has been done statewide on providing other means of correction, the promotion of, positive behavioral interventions and success, to hopefully keep kids in school rather than removing them from their environment.
But I maybe I'm gonna push back on that a little bit because I see, we're always on social media and we see people talking about discipline in school. You read articles, you talk to colleagues. Is the other thing why that's going down and it looks like we're being successful but not suspending kids because administrators aren't suspending kids that should be suspended and they're having the conversation with them and then just sending them back to class and teachers are upset about that? Do you think that might be playing into it as well? I think
it's part of it, right? But at the same time, in the past, it was like every time a kid would have an issue, it'd be like, get out of my classroom, right. Get out of my classroom, get out of my classroom, and that ultimately what it comes down to is an overhaul of the entire school system on how we address student concerns or student behavioral needs. And what are we doing, to roll out a system-wide process to ensure that students are kept in school and not just shipped out. So I think it's the twofold.
Is that K? You can't suspend on K anymore?
That's correct. Which is disruptive.
Willful defiance.
Yes, defiance and disruption. So we can't do that. So definitely, I do think that is part of it. But at the same time, when you really look back to how we're addressing these behavioral needs, there are certain activities that obviously 100% suspendable, right? Yeah. Obviously, drugs, fighting, those types of things. But when you're looking at just because a kid is annoying, or maybe he's even a student with an IEP and needs some additional behavioral support, and the teacher is just outright annoyed and shipping him out, that's not helpful either, right? So, we definitely, I think there was an overhaul just to ensure that kids were not missing instruction and remaining in their classrooms.
Well, and again, I think we see this probably at the earlier grades and the later grades, but, what is your classroom management? What is your approach to classroom management? Do you have a token economy? Do you have pods? Do you have points? Do you have raffle tickets? Do you have marbles in a jar? What is your system for managing behavior? And if you do not have that system, I do not know how you approach discipline. You probably send them out of class.
You send them out, yeah.
So I think you have to, in this, going back to the kind of the PBIS model or the MTSSB model, what supports are you giving teachers to manage classrooms in a positive way so that you're avoiding punishments if at all possible? And that's another conversation because I'm very direct at having people create explicit systems. Because if you do not have an explicit system, I think we talked about this at a previous episode. You can't do an individualized intervention if you don't have a classroom management system. You can't have like a tier 3 support. But if you don't have tiers 1 and 2, then by nature you can't have a tier 3 support. So the previous work that I've done was looking back at creating those tier 1 interventions and then to tier 3 interventions, because you can't do a tier 3 intervention without having the previous 2 tiers in place. It doesn't work that way.
Well, and how are we working with kids on that restorative conversation when they come back also? Yeah. So, that oftentimes is missing, where we're shipping kids out, and maybe even we have a tier 1, tier 2, and then we're going to a tier 3 and then we ship them out and we suspend them, and then they come back to school and nobody has a conversation as a follow through for that student. And I always laugh because when you look at suspending students, ultimately, oftentimes that's what they want. They don't want to be at school anymore because school is hard for them. So maybe they want to be at home. So you're basically rewarding the negative behavior and you're reinforcing to continue to do what they've done in order to send them home. If no one is really building that, this is why this wasn't a positive, outcome. So
let's see. What do we else have for today's dashboard?
You've created now 15 episodes that we need to discuss moving forward.
I like systems when they're meaningful, they're transparent, where they present what they're supposed to present. I don't know if the dashboard does that in a meaningful way. I don't know if people really look at it besides district level people.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that's one of the things, the big takeaway.
Yeah.
As a parent, I've never looked at the dashboard. As a teacher, I've never looked at the dashboard. I imagine if you're a principal of a school, you're probably looking at how your school is done. I know if you're at the district level, for sure, you're looking at the dashboard to try to take a look at how you can positively impact student achievement. But beyond that, I don't know how much it informs the public or decision making, I think.
Yeah, it should be an easy tool to utilize, which it is not. And it should be something that is going to be useful for schools improving their practices and moving, student success forward. I don't believe it is.
And again, talk about the accountability piece. I don't know if I've seen anyone lose their jobs because they haven't performed their school or their district hasn't performed well on the dashboard. So it's not an accountability piece. It's a brief snapshot in time that may or may not represent a true student achievement. Parents aren't using it. Community's not using it. Most school leaders probably aren't using it. So then is it just this one thing that comes out annually that we take a look at and then it's out of sight, out of mind until next November? Yeah,
you might be the only one that cares about it when you go and look for your outcomes, when you rush over there. No, but it's just it's a system of pretty colors that just show, one way or the other. But I think it is important to make it more user-friendly so that people can actually utilize it. If it was user-friendly and it was a one-page, these are the outcomes of your school, I think it could be utilized more effectively. I think there's way too much even for principals to navigate through to help their staff understand where they're at and where they need to target. So, I definitely think the state needs to work on, toning it down a little bit and making something that is user-friendly, both for district level, for school site level, and then also for parents. I think it's important that we're able to know what this means. Only because I'm in education do I know, and I look at the dashboard for my child. If I was to, I have not. I wouldn't even take that and compare it to another school. For me, that wouldn't be that wouldn't be helpful. I go to Great Schools. Great Schools is that website that basically ranks schools on how they're performing. That's what I go to. So parents aren't using it. So really, what is the purpose of it?
Yeah, and I think that's probably a great place to end for today.
And we've written down 15 different episodes to do in the future.
So I'm going to give the dashboard. I'll give it an orange.
You're going to give it an orange.
I don't want to be negative. I don't want to be negative. I don't want to be.
Yeah, you do. You
negative.
really want a red.
Okay,
I'm going with the tangerine. I liked the yellow red or yellow orange combo tangerine.
I'm going.
You're going red.
Yeah. Why don't you go red? Why do I got to go red? I'm going to go orange.
Because you really don't like it.
I want to go orange because red's too extreme. I'm going to go orange card. What about you? Dashboard?
Dashboard, I would say, is probably the tangerine. I think there are some things that are helpful to districts if they can utilize it effectively, but it's still orange because I just don't know how useful it really is or how much people are really using it.
Boom.
Boom.
Get rid of the red card.
Get rid of the red card.
All righty. This has been Mosaic Days. I'm Leonard Martinez.
And I'm Allison Smith. Have a great weekend.
Thank you for joining us.